Just Mercy is a film released in the year 2020 directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, also the director of Short Term 12 and will direct the upcoming Shang-Chi movie. Just Mercy tells the story of Bryan Stevenson, a young graduate from Harvard Law School, and how he proves the innocence of Walter Mcmillian, a man sentenced to death for a crime he did not commit. Just Mercy stars Michael B. Jordan in the leading role of Bryan Stevenson, and is supported by Jamie Foxx and Brie Larson. The only reason why I watched this movie was that it was free to rent on the iTunes store, and I love free stuff. Because of the recent protests and the revival of the Black Lives Matter movement, I thought that this would be a good watch to entertain me and maybe educate me on the subject. I had not seen any of the director's previous work, so I had absolutely no expectations in that regard. Got good reviews on popular critic aggregate sites as well. You could say that I was looking forward to this film. What I got was unsatisfactory, to say the least. But your first reaction to this was, wow, this guy must be a racist since he didn't like Just Mercy. This was probably your first reaction to a negative opinion of Black Panther as well. You're any sane person, this is obviously false and a show of ignorance towards the film. I have the ability to dislike this film and still agree with the message it presents, as to me, they are completely different things. The message of a movie is something that can be taken out of context of the film and still make sense. This is the thing that you're supposed to learn or take out of the movie, and not the entire film itself. My review is only judging this film based on its merit as a film and nothing more than that. This film shouldn't be placed on some sort of pedestal because it deals with relevant issues. People forget that this movie deserves to be treated like any other movie, and it deserves to be criticized for its many flaws. Moral of the story: I support and agree with the message, while disliking the film. Just Mercy is an incredibly generic film. It doesn't present anything exciting or interesting to the audience, and because of this, I got really bored while watching this movie. And this isn't because I'm sort of action movie junkie that needs to be stimulated every single second, but rather because I already knew how the story was going to pan out from the very start. I'm the type of moviegoer who tries to predict what's going to happen in a film before it actually happens because it's a fun thing to do. Literally every prediction I guessed happened in the film. Yippee! I'm some sort of film genius now. It wasn't as hard as you would expect though. If you know basic story structure such as the protagonist wins in the end, the protagonist is at his or her lowest point at the end of the second act, and so on, you will not have a hard time predicting the twists and turns of the movie. I was hoping for something surprising or interesting in this film, but I never got it. And if you're wondering, which you probably aren't, I'm not going to analyze this film at all. I've tried for hours and hours to find some things to nitpick and break down, but I've found nothing. This film is so surface level that you can catch every nuance in the first viewing. This is an obvious flaw with the picture since it hinders the ability to rewatch the film. At least a movie like Capone had elements that try something new, even though they fail miserably. It would be more fun to nitpick that movie more than this one because there's actually things to talk about. Every character is an archetype. Bryan Stevenson is the good, generic, altruistic protagonist that's always on the right side of the argument. Johnny D is the unknowing, innocent man who is thrust into a dire situation. Eva Langley is the encouraging and supportive friend that helps the protagonist achieve his goals. This movie is full of one-dimensional, single-faced characters that have predetermined strengths and flaws. Character archetypes are inherently bad, but in this movie, they add to how generic this film is. Bryan Stevenson is particularly bad because he literally has no flaws. He's good looking, always considerate, he immediately knows what to say in a tough situation, and he makes the noblest and most heroic decision at every turn. Bryan isn't an interesting character. His boringness is amplified more because he never struggles within the film. There are movies where you have a perfect protagonist who is thrust in a complicated and tough situation, most notably the James Bond films. Here you have this perfect man the man that every man aspires to be, and he's thrust into these complicated and tough situations, and you wonder, how is he going to get out? Bryan Stevenson does have some forced setbacks during the film, but they're just there to have them, as they are used sparingly and have no real dire consequences in the end. I actually thought the pacing was pretty decent. This is actually a minor compliment, since it follows the standard 3-act structure to a T, which is generic. But they never stop to have an empowering moment. Racism is shown through the setting. Instead, near the beginning of the movie, Bryan Stevenson faces some racial discrimination in Alabama. The way it was shown made it seem like a comparison between the North, where Bryan Stevenson is from, and Alabama. This is actually creative, and I applaud the movie for that. Racism is also an important piece of the plot, but it isn't used as effectively as how they used it for the setting. In the movie, there are no real acts of discrimination solely because Johnny or Brian is African American. As an audience member, I didn't know if what they were doing in the courts was inherently racist. For example, in the movie, the judge doesn't grant Brian a retrial. For me, it is nearly impossible to tell if this was an act of racism or the judge's unbiased decision. This is perhaps there's no contrast between how they treat whites and blacks, as nearly no white criminals are shown to contrast Johnny D. They could have shown that they do treat white people differently than blacks in the courts and in death row. Maybe the director wasn't intending to show racism in the courts, but structural racism in the government is one of the core themes of the film, so this shouldn't be excused. Michael B. Jordan was good. What else do you want me to say? He did a solid performance. It wasn't as good as Creed, but it was still a solid performance. He wasn't that good in this movie. Thank God I saw this at home, so I could turn on the subtitles. Jamie Foxx literally mumbled all of his lines, and I couldn't understand a single thing he was saying. The closest comparison to his performance in this movie is his performance in Sleepless. You know, the They Got Tea movie.
That's gonna be an easy grab. Well, it ain't no easy grab. They got teeth.
Her southern accent was bad. Karen in the South, if you will. Just Mercy isn't a good movie. It is incredibly generic, and it doesn't try anything new or inventive in its conventions. Please realize that I don't disagree with this film's message, and I do think death row and the justice system isn't fair towards African Americans. I just think that this is a bad film with no room for analysis since it is so surface level. I wouldn't recommend this film to anybody. Maybe if you really wanted to hear the story of how Bryan Stevenson proved the innocence of Walter Mcmillian back in 1987. Instead, I recommend you watch The Last Black Man in San Francisco, Moonlight, or Black Klansman. These movies show the themes of racism, societal oppression, and being African American in America a lot better than Just Mercy does. With this all being said, I give this film a 4 out of 10.